I guys hope you're doing well. Thanks for being here tonight. First, I want to take a moment to thank Derek and for the people responsible for putting this all together. I was speaking with somebody before this started tonight, and I think it's a really important time for us, and I'll kind of get into that in my speech today, and hopefully try to illustrate why I think little things, even like what we're doing tonight, make a big difference. So thank you, Derek, for everything you've done to put this together, and all of those who helped sponsor this event. And Goodfellas, God bless you for pizza. I want to also thank my wife. My wife is over here. She doesn't necessarily always have the opportunity to come and be with me, but I love it when she does, because I know she is one of the few people who will take the opportunity to tell me exactly how good of a speech I gave. And she's an encourager too in that, so I don't mean to be dour, because she, I'll say things like, babe, I think that was the worst speech I've ever given, and she'll encourage me and she'll say, no, babe, you've done way worse than that. So I appreciate her being here tonight. She's an amazing influence and encouragement in my life. I want to thank you guys for being here too. I think tonight will be an important night, because I want to tell you that the cultural revolution has begun. Woke NeoMarxists have invaded our institutions, the mainstream media, our academy, and even the Democratic Party. But there's good news tonight. We can stop it. But if we're going to talk about how to stop it, we need to know what we're talking about in the first place. So what is the woke neo-Marxist revolution? We hear it all the time, we talk about it, but what is it and where did it come from? Well, there's a guy named Yoram Hazony, and in his book, Rediscovering Conservatism, he says this. He says that in the 1940s, there was a movement away from our past traditions, our Christian ethics and our Christian values. In this post-World War II era, America was fueled by prosperity because they got into the war late, and as a result of that, they have a little bit more resources than the rest of the world, and it actually produced much of the wealth and prosperity that we have right now in this country, because the rest of the world had to look to us by and large for many of those resources. So fueled by that prosperity, some of the elitists in our country, this is Republicans and Democrats, so this is not just even kind of like in the Frankfurt School, if you've ever heard about that before. This is kind of a mainstream move. The Republicans and Democrats alike decide that they want to usher forth a new era, so they participate in an experiment. They move into an era of pure liberalism. Now, they do this for good reason. They just got done in the 20th century looking at the bloodiest century in human history, or at least they think it's a good reason. And they see all the blood, they see all the bodies, and they see what it's done to the world, and they say, hey, what we want to do is we want to try to elevate freedom to a high level, a high value in our society. So we're going to place that as the highest value, because we see what totalitarianism has done to the world. So we're going to place freedom at a high value level, and then the only way we're going to regulate that freedom is by consent. So the consent of the governed, they're able to relegate and regulate that freedom that we now trust as the highest value in a society. Now again, they're doing this against the backdrop of removing the foundation that has been in our society for so very long, which is those Christian traditions and values. And so that experiment goes from the 40s into the freewheeling 50s, and then the 60s and the 70s and the protest movements there, and it really creates the world as we have come to know it. But then something interesting happened, and we are all a participant in this, and so it's a unique time in history. Something interesting happened in 2020. Maybe you guys are familiar. So in 2020, we had a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic. We had racial riots that broke forth in major cities in America and around the whole world. And in the midst of that, we had been suffering under the weight of pure liberalism and how it had unmoored us and taken away the foundation of the very things that provide meaning in our life, the very thing that provides purpose in our life. Because hopefully by now we're willing to understand that freedom alone isn't the thing that's truly going to provide the purpose that we all so desperately need in our life. And so we've been suffering under the weight of liberalism since the 40s, and so a new movement comes on in the midst of us being totally shaken and experiencing something that we never thought we'd experience in our life. This movement comes and it provides the value system that our society has been stripped away. The problem is that value system is actually devoid of any actual, real, authentic values. They come preaching anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they will get your obedience to it. You will bow the knee to it. And so this is where you hear very often people calling this kind of like the religious left, because in many ways what was offered was a religion of sorts in absence of the religion that we have come to know in the past. So pure liberalism, in other words, ushered us into an age of secularism. Secularism didn't provide the needs for our soul and for the needs to really bind us together as a society. And in the midst of one of the greatest crises in recent memory, we, now shaken from that, are looking for something to believe in, a value system, if you will, a monolithic structure. Now again, liberalism has been really good at saying we don't want hierarchies. We want to totally level everything out so everything is available for everyone and it's free and there's no hierarchies oppressing everyone. The conservative doesn't believe that hierarchies are necessarily oppressive. They believe that hierarchies are just natural parts of life. Now, you have to relegate them, sure, to some degree, but hierarchies are just part of being a human being. Now, removing those hierarchies left us without a structure to truly believe in. And so the woke neo-Marxist movement comes in and they offer a hierarchy of their own. Now, of course, they say hierarchies are totally oppressive, so believe in our hierarchy. So it's completely, you know, the law of non-contradiction being violated over and over again. So needless to say, I hope we understand the gravity of what we just experienced in our nation. I hope we understand that we're watching in our midst a cultural revolution that in some ways is unparalleled, and certainly a cultural upheaval that demands our attention. So the question is, if this is what the neo-Marxist woke revolution actually is, what can we do about it? How can we really, truly combat it? Well, we can combat it by replacing the thing that was taken away. We can combat it with replacing it with the thing that Marx hated more than anything else. He hated it so much he called it the opiate of the masses. We can fight back against it by replacing the foundation that this house was built upon. And that, of course, is, if you know the quote, religion is the opiate of the masses. We can do that by replacing that secular ideology of pure liberalism and replace it with faith. That's why I want to boldly declare to you today that I believe that the answer for what is going on in our nation today is nothing short of Christian conservatism, and we need to see a rise in Christian conservatism. Now, I don't know where even most of you may stand as far as this is concerned. And I realize that most political speeches will somewhere prance around whether or not DeSantis or Trump should win. However, call me foolish, but I don't think that that actually is the answer to what's going on in our nation. Now, vote, of course, obviously, get involved. And I'm not saying anything other than that, but I am just saying the real key to what we're experiencing in our nation is a return and a rise to Christian conservatism. Now, you may ask yourself, okay, if that is true, why? Well, John Adams said it well. And he knew something special about our country that we need to return to. He said that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So you remove that, and surprise, everything that we've worked so hard for, that blood, sweat, and tears have been shed to protect and take care of, now all of that starts to unravel. So you may ask yourself again, why? All right, so if John Adams is right, why? Why do we need to return to Christian conservatism to fight the woke neo-Marxist revolution? Here's why. Because the ideas that are found in Christian scripture, I would argue, give us an accurate view of humanity. See, it doesn't take long driving around in Tennessee to realize that original sin actually taints every single one of us, especially I-75 around rush hour. You realize it'll help your driving, by the way. You don't just test me on this. Pretend that everyone around you is tainted with original sin, and then you will realize why that person in the passing lane will not get over. It's just food for thought. So suffice to say, it gives an accurate view of human nature. And see, liberalism didn't do that. People like Rousseau said people are born free everywhere, but because of society are in chains. See, it's just because of the system that you're oppressed. It's not because of your own personal decision making. And this is what provides for us the spectacular kind of George Soros justice system that slaps criminals on the hand, sends them back on the streets to continue murdering people and stealing from people. If they even get slapped on the hand, that is. It's this idea that society did you wrong, so you get to point the finger at them rather than point it back at you. See, it's a fundamental different view than what the Christian conservative believes, which is that original sin has tainted all of us, and that we need individual responsibility in order to heal that brokenness and God. And then I would also say this, and probably this is the most important part, is that the ideas found in Christian scripture and Christian conservatism provide for us a backdrop for values. If there was anything that we found out in 2020 is that we need a system of values. See, the government tried to offer us Anthony Fauci instead of actual values, and we see how that worked out. So if we're going to talk about good and bad, the problem with that is we can't really do that without invoking theological concepts. Michael Knowles, if you're familiar with him, was just recently on the bastion of beautiful thinking and wonderful thinking, the Whatever podcast. So it's a room full of Gen Z young ladies with microphones in front of them, and he was talking to them about abortion. And of course, you can imagine what some of the responses were. And they said, oh, you cannot use religious arguments when talking about abortion. How many of you guys have heard that, right? Don't shove your religion down my throat. Let's not talk about this from a religious perspective. Like, why not? Why do you get to talk about your religion, but I don't? So they said, you can't talk about religions. And they said, you can't talk about religions because there's just too many. Why does your religion get to win? I could tell you that later, and maybe we'll talk about that in the Q&A. But pushing that aside, he gives this argument. He says, is it good to kick a baby in the head or to bake a pie for somebody, to cook a pie for somebody? Which one of those is good? And of course they pander a little bit and then bicker back and forth. And of course they say, well, I guess it's better to give someone a pie. Yeah, so I guess it's better to give somebody a pie than to kick a baby in the head. It's like the postmodern response of our age. So they say, I guess it's better. So there, Michael Knowles argues, and so do I, that when you use the word better, when you use the word good, you're using a transcendent value system that necessitates a transcendent value giver. Otherwise, what is good? Is it arbitrarily defined? Of course, that's what the atheist thinks. They say that this world is exactly what you would expect if there was no God. No good, no bad, just pitiless indifference. That's Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion. Just pitiless indifference, no good, no bad. So the atheist, and Richard Dawkins is correct about this, the atheist cannot argue the existence of good and evil, therefore he has to say it doesn't exist. So he cannot actually say that what happened in Germany under Nazi regime is bad. He cannot say that molesting a child is bad because he's going to have to then define where that value system comes from. And of course, it has to come outside of yourself. It must be transcendent, which means to have moral law, you must have a moral law giver. Now this is why this is important to us, guys, because I don't know if you've heard it before, but we hear it more and more. Don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. And one way I agree, I'll use an analogy here from optometry. So there are people who suffer from hyperopia. Those are people who see far away but can't see close by, right? So these would be the people who get distracted by things that are far off in the distance and miss the things right in front of us. So I think this just happened recently, by the way, in Nashville. So maybe a day or two after that trans activist came into a Christian school and killed 6 people, what happened? About 2 days after, the arraignment of Donald Trump, the shiny object of the left, distracting everyone from what actually probably was arguably a creation of the left. I don't know about you, but if you told me that there's a genocide coming for your kids, there's a genocide coming for you, these people want to deny your existence, I would protect myself against those people. And this was what the left had been doing with their rhetoric for a very long time. And so in many ways, the left was responsible for the creation of the animosity that's being stoked right now in our society, especially in the trans movement. And so quickly the narrative changed, and we get again the media trying to control the news cycle to take attention away from what took place. Now they were quick also to focus on the shooter and totally forget about the families. So I digress, but so it's important, I think, that we don't get distracted. But then there are people say who don't get distracted by this, and I think you should be distracted by it. When in East Ridge, a young man dressed as a woman comes to school to teach a bunch of elementary school kids. And wants them to call him Miss. I think that's something we should be distracted about. Now, some conservatives take the middle ground position and they say, hey, trans people vote too. We want to win that voter block. Guys, I can only tell you this. Don't miss what's right in front of your face and realize that if this is really about power at the end of the day and about having power for the right reasons, then what are we doing here? If it's not to stop those kind of things from being foisted over on our children. If it's not to focus on things like abortion. By the way, I would say that while we focus on what's happening in Eastridge Elementary, we also don't forget the fact that babies are still being aborted in this country every single day. So it's important that we don't get distracted, but that we do get distracted by the right things. And how do we establish that value system? How do we know what to focus on? There's a culture war every single second. You got Dylan Mulvaney with Bud Light 1 second, and then you have Disney dressing up their characters in rainbow colors the next. And it's like every single day there's a new culture battle to fight. Do we just totally relent and say, like some conservatives, oh, I'm tired and worn out by all of the outrage and the clickbait, and I'm just gonna avoid it all? Or do we adapt what optometrists call visual acuity, where we can see far away and we can see close? We can see perfectly what's going on around us, and we estimate and value those things in the way that they should be evaluated. That's why I took the most time with this one last thing, because I'm still on the subject of why do we need Christian conservatism? And here's why. Because without God, without Christian values and Christian ethics, we don't understand what is good, what is right, what is evil, what is dark, and what we should truly focus on. We'll constantly be driven by the news cycle ourselves if we don't have a foundation. So I would encourage each and every person here, regardless of what your faith background is, to consider the words that I'm saying. Because when I say Christian conservatism, I don't mean everybody has to be a Christian. I mean that we need to return to a place where the public square was okay with Christian ideas instead of don't bring your religion here. Where we return to the place where we can actually openly and freely discuss these things like intellectual beings, instead of saying, no, this kind of conversation is anathema. Can't do that here. I'm arguing that we bring it back, and we do so boldly, and we do so intelligently. And again, I'm talking about people like Douglas Murray, who, as far as I know, is an atheist and a homosexual, but who is a prolific writer and appreciates the contribution that Christianity has made to this nation for so long. So I'm talking about people like him who are willing to introduce into the conversation Christian ideas, Christian traditions, Christian values, and Christian ethics. Now, it is the obligation of every good society to provide freedom for its citizens. But it is the obligation of every free citizen to be good. So be good and do good, but know where good comes from and go with God. God bless you guys. I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Definitely agree with a lot of things that you said, especially about how it seems like a lot of the younger generation is getting away more from God and elevating politics and religion. What would be your recommendation, like with young people that we interact with? How would we get them to shift away from that? Yeah. And I'm sure the answer is obviously talk about God and church, but if you have any recommendations.
So I would say this: it doesn't necessarily have to start there. I think it should somehow enter into the conversation. I really do. But listen, I'm not saying, as much as I love proselytizing and shoving my religion down people's throat, I'm not even saying that. What I am saying is, don't be afraid to enter that into the conversation. Don't fall for the blackmail that has been so prolific as a result of liberalism, which is to tell you that your religious ideas have no place in my abortion debate. Because could you think of anything more ridiculous than that? Of course it does. So I would just say, one, don't hesitate to do that. But I would also give you a tip, perhaps, that I think I've had to learn the hard way. You have to be really discerning about who you're talking to. Make sure that the person that you're talking to actually cares about listening. I know that's a wild concept, but But more and more, we are talking past each other, and to a degree, you have to understand like the purpose. All right, so if you're at a debate and there's people listening and you're talking past each other, debate away. Talk past each other away. Because there are people who are listening in the process and gaining from it. If you're in an individual conversation and you feel like it's going nowhere, I don't know why you would waste your time, other than that perhaps somewhere deep down you know that what the person you're speaking to needs to hear what you're saying. I would also not underestimate that. I could give you analogy after analogy in terms of what this looks like from a faith perspective, but you never know the seeds that you're planting, even from the people who resist you the most. I'll just throw this last one out there, and I hope this is somewhat helpful, is that in a debate, whether it be on social media especially, or in a debate that I've had with another person physically, I have yet, and I've talked with other debaters and they also concur, I have yet to speak with the individual who has said, you know what, you're totally right, I'm changing my mind, right? It doesn't happen. It's like a unicorn. So I would evaluate the person that you're speaking to, but I would also make sure that the things that you're saying matter, and if so, speak away.
What would you say are the top 3 books that you would recommend to somebody who wants to know more?
Okay, so some of these are going to be cliche perhaps, but it just depends if you want to go a little bit deeper in the conversation that I had with you today. So one of them is definitely going to be Ben Shapiro's The Right Side of History. It's a fantastic book. I think it probably is his best book, and I've read almost all of his books, just simply because it gives a faith perspective throughout history, and that I think is really, really beneficial. And then I would, Christian Liberalism by Machen is a great book. I would highly recommend that one. That one will give you a really clear idea about kind of what's going on in the church and what's going on, how liberalism has impacted society. And then, I don't know if this is a top one, but it is one that I really like, and I believe it's a field manual for the culture war. So Peter Kreeft's How to Win the Culture War. Peter Kreeft is a Catholic philosopher, and I myself am not even Catholic. I'm going to go ahead and drop the mask. I am a crazy evangelical Pentecostal. But I love Catholic thinkers, and Peter Kreeft is one of them. So How to Win the Culture War is a fantastic book. So those 3 books. But Christian Liberalism is probably my favorite. Anybody else?
So I would say that your podcast is my top 4.
I knew I liked you.
Yeah, right. My 3, then read. I refer to videos often, and I struggle because I listen to them in the truck on the way back. Yeah. So I agree with a lot of what you say, like Derek said. You're obviously articulate, intelligent, and well-read. I wanted to ask you about hope. Also wanted to ask you about engagement. We're not going to go engage at the same level, which I'm going to guys. Y'all can. I will go engage at your level. I think that there are lots of ways to engage in the debate. Yeah. Not losing hope is one. Living your life as a Christian, because people do watch. You talked about talking past each other, and people that being useful because people can witness that, learn from that, appreciate that. I think also living our life faithfully, and I think we have lost joy, we've lost hope. We're not living our lives hopeful based on it. And in case you don't know, Reed and I go to church together. So I'm a crazy, what I may not be Pentecostal.
Oh, yeah.
I may not be Pentecostal. But I believe that living our life with hope is also critical. Yeah. Can you expand on that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that if anything, I hope my conversation tonight with you guys, my speech actually provided a little bit of that.
Yes.
Because I believe that we can win, and I believe that we're not far from it, but I do believe that we're going to have to reclaim what I spoke about. And I think that's the hardest sell, because we've been so indoctrinated culturally by the ideas of liberalism. And there's some good things to liberalism too, but ultimately the removal of Christian ideas and the Christian foundation is the worst part of liberalism, and it's brought us to this kind of hopeless place now where it's kind of, pursue your own autonomous pleasure, and as long as you consent to it and it's consensual, then no holds bars. So I, as bad as it seems out there, I'll still remind you of the cliche, the smallest flicker of light in the midst of the darkness shines sometimes the brightest. You just got to be willing to unashamedly shine. And you have to be willing to accept that culture matters. You have to be willing to engage in the culture war. You have to be willing to be okay with people not liking you. Now, you've heard me in the past talk about this. It's like we can be winsome and win the debate. However, you're going to have to be okay with people not liking you. And if you are, your life becomes a little bit better, because now you're not beholden to the opinions of other people. Now, don't make them not like you because you're a jerk. Make them not like you because of what you stand for. And I think that will truly can make a difference. I mean, I know it can. And it doesn't have to be many. It just has to be people who are bold enough to do it. Yes, sir.
I think, to summarize, it sounds like you're saying liberalism is the opposite of character.
Yeah, the opposite of Christianity, because Christianity, I believe, is the thing that provides character. Not solely. It doesn't mean that if you're an atheist, you can't do good things or even be a good person. I'm just saying to consistently be good and have a foundation by which you can derive an understanding of the good, then you're going to have to posit the existence of a God. So, yeah, yes, sir.
I'd like to respect how did you square with the Unitarianism of getting, there's a lot of religious, perspectives.
Right.
Pentecostal, Presbyterian, all the others, right? Yeah. How do you square into that progressive Christian? The ones who support the way, certain how do you square that?
Well, I would say 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5, and you can't square circles. So I would tell you the very obvious thing that seems to escape most people, which is that if we're going to talk about Christianity, we might have to use that little pesky Bible thing to kind of help us develop our understanding of what Christianity is. The problem with the progressive Christian is that the progressive Christian doesn't want to use Scripture as an authoritative text. If they do, it's only to prove their point rather than to actually detail what it actually says. Because the real problem is that Christian progressivism is a descendant of liberalism. So the problem is that they've been completely unmoored from a biblical worldview, and then they intersect the Bible. They do something, I hope this doesn't sound too geeky, but I'm a theologian, and I got you for just a couple more seconds. So they do something called eisegesis. So what they do is they take their perspective and they read it into the text, rather than to derive their perspective from the text. Now, every single one of us have our own biases. It's just true, right? There's things that I don't see that I'm blind to, and I bring my bias into the Bible. The difference is that I care to fight that. I care to recognize it as much as I can and to push against that. The Christian progressive does not. They participate in eisegesis. What they want to do is they would take the postmodern idea of their personal experience being the highest epistemic value, and then they read their personal experience and their oppression or whatnot into the text, and then they try to make the text say something about that. So this is where you get people like Justin Pearson, who is one of the Tennessee Three, getting up and talking about my black Jesus and we're made of stardust and Mother God, and he can't make up his mind if he is a Unitarian, a progressive Christian, or a black gospel preacher. And so all of that confusion simply comes from a basic idea. Let's just return to the simple idea that you can read something and you can actually freaking know what it says, right? I understand King James Version and all the thous and the thou shalt nots. But, okay, but grab a translation that you can understand, fine. But it says the same thing to the black man as it says to the white man. And we need that. Hopefully that helps.
So when people hear you talk, and they're like, wow, he knows a lot about this, this, and this, but I don't know a lot about this, what would you say? What are some ways that somebody can just easily sort of educate themselves on maybe
If that's a closing question, I think it's a great one, but I'm happy to take more. It's up to you, Derek. I think it's a great question because I really do believe it's the key in a lot of ways to winning the culture war, but it wasn't anything I mentioned tonight. But I think learn one new thing each day. It's a key that I try to provide, that I try to do myself. And I think that it really, truly will help you in the long run. We overestimate what we can do in a short amount of time and underestimate what we can do in a long amount of time. So if you're learning something new each day on a subject you're passionate about, you'll become an expert. It'll probably take you about 10 years. That's depressing. But you can become an expert on something if you're consistently learning about something. So I'll be honest with you and just tell you this idea about the woke neo-Marxist revolution largely comes from the guy I quoted, Yoram Hazony, who is a guy I just recently started reading, but I'm really taken with the idea. And so it's just little by little, attrition, you start to learn things and you grow. And I would say figure out what you're about. Figure out what your message is. I figured out that for myself. Primary, Christ. Secondarily, the breakdown of the family. So I spend a lot of time, and I'll be spending more, I suppose, in the future talking about the nuclear family and the importance of dads, the importance of fathers. It's something that's near and dear to me. Now, you may want to talk about moms. Hopefully you're a woman, and of course, what is a woman? But nonetheless, whatever it is, learn something about that thing, educate yourself on that subject, and become a pro. This idea that you have to go to college to become a pro on something, I hope that is fully dispelled amongst us tonight. Maybe you think I'm a religious wacko and you got nothing else from me tonight other than this one thing. Please don't expect college to produce the kind of intellectual acuity that you need to truly deal with culture. You're going to have to do that on your own, but you can do it little by little. Did you have something?
Second question. My name is Emmanuel. Just had a really quick question. Were you raised with these specific values, like with or are you like a born-again Christian just later in life?
I told you I was crazy. Babe, was I raised with those values? All right. So with all due respect, because the Bible does say respect your mother and father, my mother is an old school liberal from San Francisco. So I came to these later in life. I didn't even become a Christian until I was 19 years old. I was raised in and around church. My mom was a single mom. My dad and my mom divorced when I was 8 years old. We were sitting around a Christmas tree, and my mom was crying her eyes out. My dad said, "Hey boys, your mom and I are going to separate for a little bit." And I had 3 brothers. And so at 8 years old, my family separated and never got back together, and my mom never remarried. And so my mom was a single mom our whole life. And still today, we battle back and forth about how a Christian can actually believe in abortion and all these other kind of things. And so no, I had to come into these things on my own as an adult. But that's why I say Christian conservatism, not because I believe conservatism has to necessarily meld with Christianity. I'm not even talking about Christian nationalism, and we can talk later about what that actually is. But all I'm saying is that conservatism and Christianity naturally meld together in many ways, and so that's why I put them together, and that's how I kind of discovered Christian values, is from my Christian faith. I think it is a natural byproduct. That's also why I think you can't be a Christian progressive liberal and actually call yourself a Christian. Well, if that's it, I just want to say thank you once again, guys, for being here. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully that was meaningful to you. And go out there and win the culture war. Thanks, Derek.